All right, we're in Hebrews chapter 10. We'll finish up chapter 10 tonight. We noticed last week the parallel in regard to the warning passage of chapter 10 to chapter 6. Probably a little bit harsher in my determination than chapter 6 was. But just like in chapter 6, after this warning passage, this really stark warning, there's a word of encouragement. And so we end the chapter with a word of encouragement. And this is going to bridge right into, well, actually, it begins a discussion that actually ends at the first part of chapter 12. And in between, of course, is chapter 11, this little aside, if you will, an explanation of faith. And so that kind of maps out where we're going. Here's this word of encouragement after a really, really kind of dark warning. And that's going to bridge into the endurance. It ends in encouraging the Christians to endure. And that's going to continue in chapter 12 with that brief little aside explaining exactly how their faith is to look. And so we'll begin by reading. We're in verse 32 of chapter 10, and we'll continue down to the end of the chapter, and then we'll break it down. He says, "But recall the former days when, after you were enlightened, you endured a hard struggle with suffering, sometimes being publicly exposed to reproach and affliction, and sometimes being partnered with those so treated. For you had compassion on those in prison, and you joyfully accepted the plundering of your property, since you knew that you yourselves had a better possession and an abiding one. Therefore, do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward. For you have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what is promised. For yet a little while, and the coming one will come and will not delay. But my righteous one shall live by faith, and if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who have faith and preserve their souls." Okay, so here's this encouraging word, and I want you to notice what he does here, and I love this. He says, recall. Recall. He is going to take them back to the feelings, to the actions, to their mindset right after they obeyed the gospel. And that is something that is very, very vital. Sometimes our past can be a very good lesson and example for the future. A lot of times, we look at other people and we look at what they do and what they're doing, and we take comfort in what they're doing and sometimes use them as our example. I want to be like them. Here he says, look at how you were. Look at those feelings, the confidence you had right after you obeyed the gospel, the endurance you had. And that's something. And if we look at our own conversions, do you remember that moment? That moment coming out of that water and the feeling that you had. That elated feeling, that feeling of confidence, of relief, of whatever. But usually you do that, and right at the point of conversion, you're ready to go. And you're wanting to go full speed. And the author here is the speaker here is saying, you need to remember that. You go back and recall the former days. The former days. And because in their case, they had already persevered through a whole lot of hardship and a whole lot of suffering. And the point he's making is that you did it then, you can do it now too. And this is in the middle of a whole bunch of people leaving Jesus, leaving the faith, going back under Judaism because of this persecution. And he says, hey, you endured it once. Yes, you're getting tired because the longer you endure something, the harder it gets, right? It tests you. You ever take a dumbbell, like a 10-pound dumbbell, and you hold it up like this? Well, that's nothing, right? 2 hours later, guess what? That's something. Even 10 minutes later, that begins to be something very quickly, right? And so the longer you endure something, the harder it is to endure. And he's telling these people, hey, you endured it, you can still endure it, and you need to persevere. It is important that you persevere to the end. And so here they are, this hard struggle. Underline that. Hard struggle. It comes from one word. And the word, we get an English word from it. And I love it when it does that because I love sounding it out and having you guess what it is. And sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But hopefully in this case you can. There's a whole board game out like that where you just read syllables. And to you they are meaningless, but everybody who's listening can hear it. And yeah, anyway. Okay, so here's the word. Are you ready? Okay, for hard struggle. Athlesis. What does that sound like to you? Athletic. Athlete. It's a word for athlete. And what's funny is right here in chapter 10 and verse 32, he sets the groundwork for chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Let us run the race with patience. That's really concluding these thoughts here. But he uses the word for hard struggle. It's athletic. And it's very vivid picture because it literally means someone who is in intense competition in an arena. Think gladiator. Gladiator. If you want to bring it up to the 21st century, boxing. Boxing. So here are these boxers, and what are the boxers doing? Well, they're punching the tar out of each other, aren't they? They're blow after blow after blow. And as they're punching one another, what do they have to have? They have to have the wherewithal, the endurance to stay up and to keep on through those 12 rounds, right? And so the picture here is, okay, you're being punched on. You're being punched down by life, by all of these trials, by everything that's going on. And you know what? Sometimes when we're punched down by life, we deserve it, don't we? We do stupid things. You know, criminals. They're punched down by life and they're stuck in a, 8x8 cell and with a big old guy named Bubba who's going to show them what for. And, you know, it's just a whole big mess. And they deserve it because they're criminals. But they have to endure their time to get out. But this word, you're not a criminal. You're not a criminal who's expected to bear up all this negativity because you deserve it. No, you're an athlete. You're an athlete, and you have to remain active, and you have to resist all of these blows that are coming your way. And so this hard struggle, and he's painting this picture, again, that he's going to complete the picture in chapter 12, but he starts this idea now. You're an athlete and you have to endure. You have to endure these struggles. If you don't endure the struggles of life, then what good was any of it? You have to endure to the end. And when you endure to the end, you have that hope, right? That's what keeps you going. The hope of that future glory. Now, verse 33, he's continuing this. And he says, hey, look at what you're enduring. Sometimes being publicly exposed to reproach and affliction. What does it mean to be reproached? That's not a word we usually use anymore a whole lot. What is it to reproach?
Accused, put down.
Accused, put down. It's a verbal action. Okay, it's words. It's words. And so these people, because of their faith in Jesus, they had people verbally punching them down. They had people verbally just pushing them down. And affliction, what's affliction?
A malady.
It's a malady. Specifically here, it's a word that is physical, beating down. And so they get it from both ways, right? We think of persecution, whether it's verbal, and they're going to put you down verbally, and they're going to make you feel this big with their words. but at the same time they're suffering reproach, that's reproach, and then affliction, physical harm. And we read about this all throughout the book of Acts, by the way, don't we? While we're talking about a Jewish persecution, Jewish on Jewish crime, if you will, we read about it in the book of Acts. And so here is this public ridicule with words and this public beating. And we can go back. In fact, he says publicly exposed. This is another one of those Greek to English words. What does this sound like? What does this sound like to you? It's the word theatrizo. 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 Theater. Theater. It's the word for theater. And the idea is the spotlight's been put on you. And so they have been having the spotlight placed on them because of the reproach, the word beatings, and because of the physical beatings, the afflictions. And sometimes they weren't the ones being afflicted, because then he says sometimes being partners with those so treated. You were just associated with some who were. You were associated with some who were. And so here they are, they're being made, the Christians at this time in the Jewish community, they were being made a spectacle of. Publicly. Publicly. And then he says in verse 34, you had compassion, sympatheo, sympathy. Literally, patheo, pathos, to feel, soon, together, to feel together with. But this is more, in this case, than just feeling together with someone. It's feeling together which results in assistance. And it's the same word, and using the same word in the same form, in the same idea, he's actually connecting it to chapter 4 when he talks about Jesus sympathizing with us. Jesus knows how it feels to be human, so he aids his children. The Christians at this time, seeing everybody in this affliction, knows what that affliction means, and they go to aid them. And so he says, sometimes being publicly exposed, but you had compassion, sympathy, and literally on those in prison. That was a big thing in the 1st and 2nd centuries, even into the 3rd centuries. Because of the faith in Jesus, many Christians were unjustly accused of crimes and thrown in prison. And we even see that again in the book of Acts. That's what Paul was doing, right? Before he converted, he was going around. He was the head of the Jewish synagogue's Gestapo, and he was just going around grabbing people, throwing them in cells. And so the Christians' ethic at that time, you go visit these innocent ones. You go be with these innocent ones. And just like we read in the lettuce commands 2 paragraphs back, it's all about being gathered together in order to draw near to God and to have confidence in Jesus and to stir one another up. And this is part of that action. They were going to these innocent brothers and sisters in Christ who were been thrown in prison because of their faith. Because of their faith. And he doesn't even stop there. This solidarity, by the way, this solidarity wouldn't have been an easy thing to choke down. Because by going and visiting with these evil Christians as their society looked upon them, they were placing themselves and connecting themselves to them. And they were running the risk of the same treatment to them and their own families. But they were willing to run the risk. And he's about to get into answer the question why they were willing to do that. Because ultimately, when you look at that, he says, you had compassion on those in prison, and you joyfully accepted the plundering of your property. Now that sounds weird, doesn't it? I mean, that attitude is completely opposite the attitude of our culture. The attitude of most people, and even to people in their day, by the way. Humanity says, what's mine is mine, and you're not going to take it, right? I mean, we really, and we have that strong ethos about it. I mean, that is our American ethic coming out. You're not going to take what's mine, but I'll give you this 9mm bullet instead, right? That's how we think. And yet, what's the Christian ethic say?
Let them have it.
Let them have it. Let them have it. And oh man, that's a hard pill to swallow, isn't it? That's a really hard pill to swallow, but this is highlighted here. Because they were willing to have even their land confiscated, which could have happened, which was a thing. It could have been taken away by a mob. It would be taken away by civil authorities if they're deemed troublemakers. It could be a disinheritance from their own family, because many times the families are really coming down on their relatives who are Christians. And even more so than that, loss of property is one thing, but to the Jewish mindset, in a culture that's all about shame and dignity, their dignity is being taken away too. When they lose everything they have, and they lose their possessions, and they lose all of that, they lose their dignity as well. And so here's all of this verbal harassment, physical harassment, property confiscation, imprisonment. And can you see why individuals were walking away? I mean, really, let's bring it up to 2023. You know people who've walked away from the church. I know people who've walked away from the church. Does any of their maladies fall into this? You know why we walk away from the church today? Well, I voted for the red carpet and they chose green. Brother so-and-so talked to me harshly. Sister so-and-so gave me a dirty look. That song leader leads too slow. That preacher preaches too long. How would we deal if we were dealing with this? It's where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? And Paul, the Hebrew writer, he's telling them, hey, you're going through all of this, and you endured it before, you can still endure it now. Don't be like those, verse 25, who abandoned the assembly for good. Don't leave the faith. Don't leave God's people down and out.
It was more than just religion. It was a community type thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you were a Jew, I mean, they took care of each other.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And to be excommunicated, I guess, from the Jewish brethren, I mean, that was a total loss.
Yeah, a complete loss of livelihood. Your business is no longer going to be supported. Yeah, disinheritance.
And they couldn't go to the Gentiles.
No.
There was no hope there. They
Mm-mm.
did that on their own.
You're done. Matthew 6:19 and 20. Someone read that for me.
I got it.
Hmm?
Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal.
Now, this is right in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus is warning against getting caught up in things. Don't let things, don't put your emphasis, your exclamation mark on things. And because these people were losing their things, look at what he says to them. You endured all this since you knew that you yourselves had a better possession and an abiding one. Now, this whole book's been about better. right? Jesus is better than the angels. He's giving us a better covenant with a better sacrifice, his own blood. And now, look at this. Our inheritance is better. And it's better than anything else on earth, because what did Jesus say happens to the treasures of earth? They rust away. They can be stolen. But this inheritance, this better possession, is abiding. And it's the same word he uses to describe the priesthood of Jesus himself. And the idea is it's going to remain. Your inheritance is just as secure as Jesus' office as our perfect and permanent priest. And so he says, do not throw away your confidence. Do not throw away your confidence, because your confidence in Jesus, your confidence, your faith in Jesus, the end result is a great reward. Can you imagine? When we were in D.C., we went to the Smithsonian and we saw that big diamond, the Hope Diamond. Y'all know the Hope Diamond? That thing would break a finger if you made it into a ring. Let me tell you something. That thing is huge. In fact, the diamond in Titanic was modeled after it. Beautiful, right? Can you imagine someone, the owner, just taking that, this priceless thing, and just throwing it away? I'm done looking at it. The case takes up too much room. Just toss it. Just toss it. You'd say, you're out of your mind. You're out of your mind. What are you doing? And yet, how quickly will we throw faith away? He's saying, no, don't throw away your confidence, because connected to it is a great reward. And look at this. I love this. I love this connection here. There's this joyful acceptance he's talking about, all of these things, and he's reminding them, don't throw it all away. And here's how you don't throw it all away. Verse 36, you have need of endurance. That's number one. The endurance causes you, he says, so that when you have done obedience, the will of God, you have confidence, which leads to endurance, which leads to continual obedience. Those are the three things. You hold on to your faith, and your faith and that endurance and that obedience, all three of those are required to claim the promised reward that God has promised. So you hold on to those. You hold on to your faith. And again, where we look is where we're headed, right? You ever try to walk backwards? How awkward it is walking backwards or sideways or walking with a blindfold on? We need our eyes to travel. Anybody ever driven with a blindfold on? There's got to be somebody, because there's tons of people in this area who act like they're driving with a blindfold on.
I just can't drive.
They just can't drive.
I just can't drive.
But in all seriousness, as we're moving through this life, where's our eyes? If it's on the treasures of this world, guess what? One little thing happens, we're done. But if we keep our eyes on Jesus, if we keep our eyes on Him, if that is where our faith and our confidence lie, then we're going to endure the hard times. We're going to endure the times when Sister Betty better than you looks at you sideways, or doesn't like the plaid in your tie, or doesn't like the paisley in your socks, and says something a little too harsh. We'll overlook it, because our eyes aren't here on the temporal. They're on the permanent. And that will give us the endurance to endure all these hardships and trials, and even these major things that come along in life. And as we endure with that confidence, we'll be obedient. Because we're going to be wanting to please not sister better than you, not anyone around, not the community and the culture at large that's pushing us in certain directions. No, we're going to please who?
God.
We're going to want to please God and Him alone. And therefore, we're going to endure and be obedient. And that's vital. That's vital if we want that reward, if we want to receive that promised inheritance. Now, he's going to quote from Isaiah, and he's going to quote from Habakkuk. And he's doing this, and this becomes very, very interesting. I love how the author continually uses the Old Testament and how he uses the Old Testament. It's fascinating to me. But keeping this idea of confidence and obedience and endurance and all of this together that leads us to inherit, he quotes from these two. And basically what he does by using these quotes and putting them together within this context, he basically tells his audience of Hebrew Christians, you've got a choice to make. Which direction are you going to go? You've got a choice. And really, that's true in every situation of life. You have a choice. Which direction are you going to go? Who are you going to please with that choice? Who are you aiming to please with that choice? You can go one way and throw it all away. Or you can hold on, and even though it may have consequences that make your life harder, the ultimate end will be worth it. And so he goes to Isaiah. It's Isaiah 26:20, and he just takes a segment from it. He says, yet a little while. Yet a little while. Now, what Isaiah is doing here, it's interesting. He's calling people, he's telling God's people, he's basically talking to what will be the remnant. But he's telling God's people to hide. He's telling the faithful to hide until God's anger and God's fury against wicked Israel has passed by. It's going to pass by. He's going to be done. You hide. In other words, you hold on. And he connects that phrase from that verse, for a little while or yet a little while, from 26:20, and he connects it with a prophecy of Habakkuk. And Habakkuk is reminding the Hebrews that, well, basically, God has made known to Habakkuk that he's sending the Babylonians in. The Babylonians are going to come and judge Judah. They're going to judge Jerusalem. That's chapter 1 of Habakkuk. And in chapter 2 of Habakkuk, God is assuring Habakkuk that this vision of destruction is going to come. This judgment against Judah and Jerusalem, it's going to come. It's going to pass. But what the Hebrew writer does in connecting it with Isaiah, he lifts it up and he takes that judgment on Jerusalem and Judah by Babylon, who is coming, and he uses it as a type antitype. And he uses that to point to the ultimate judgment when Jesus returns. And he tells them, hold on till then. Hold on till then. Hold on. And so what he does is he escalates this historical judgment and uses it to point to the final judgment that's going to come. And so ultimately, it becomes a warning and an encouragement for these early Christians. Just hold on. Endure. Hold on. You can do this. One interesting thing, and this gets into a textual issue here, but the author inverts a couple of phrases from Habakkuk. And what he does is he takes my righteous one. He says, yet a little while and the coming one will come and will not delay. But my righteous one shall live by faith, and if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. What he does is he inverts and brings my righteous one to the beginning of the quote. And now that my righteous one is at the beginning, that's where the spotlight is shone on. And basically the writer's saying, that's you. That's you. He's giving them confidence. He says, I have confidence in you. I have confidence you're going to do this. You're going to do this. And you're going to be approved if you do this. But if they shrink back, just like that wilderness generation, that's really the group that he keeps going back to as being failures to God. If they shrink back like that wilderness generation, what's going to happen? He says, I have no pleasure in them. He's going to reject them. They're going to be rejected. And so overall, when he takes these two quotations, he is showing that God is going to intervene on behalf of his people. God is going to intervene on behalf of his people. But what's the problem with that? What's the problem with that? We know that. But the problem is it's not on our timetable, right?
Yes.
We have to wait on him. He's going to intervene for his people absolutely in his good time. And you know what? When you're holding out that 10-pound dumbbell straight out, and that arm's getting heavier and heavier as the seconds are ticking by, time is relative, isn't it? Isn't that what we learned from science? Time is relative. And man, when you're in hardships and when you're pressed down on it, time tends to go very, very slowly. And so here he's saying God's going to intervene on behalf of his people, but it's going to be on his time, and that's going to require endurance. And that's going to require patience. And we have to wait patiently, and we have to ultimately live by faith. Live by faith. And so, there's going to be one that's going to come and deliver. The coming is assured, but what is he going to find when he comes? And that's really verse 39, isn't it? We are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who have faith and preserve their souls. So what is he going to find when he comes back? What is he going to find? Is he going to find the faithful on earth awaiting? And in fact, I love Luke 21:19. Jesus says, by your endurance, you will gain your lives. It takes endurance. This last verse of chapter 10, it's really a perfect summation to this entire section, isn't it? I mean, this is it. And again, he's expressing confidence in him. He's in them. He's telling these people all of these things. He's explaining this to them, but he's doing it in such a way that I know you're going to make the right decision. I know you're going to do the right thing. I know you're going to endure. I know you're going to be part of those who do not shrink back and are destroyed. I know you're going to have the faith and have your souls preserved. There's a confidence in that. And this confidence that they're going to imitate all of their faithful ancestors. And by imitating their faithful ancestors, they're going to inherit the promises. But if they withdraw, what's going to happen? They're going to be destroyed. They shrink back. If they withdraw, if they retreat, they're going to be destroyed. And so really there's this dichotomy here. There's this really plain, very plain two possibilities. And there's no gray area in the middle, is there? Two options. You're going to shrink back and quit and give up and abandon the assembly. And you're going to you're going to look for something else that's not even there. Or you're going to endure all these hardships, keeping your eyes focused on Jesus. And that's what he would instruct them in chapter 12, right? keeping your eyes on Jesus and enduring the hardships, knowing that something better, something that endures, something that abides forever is waiting for you. There's no neutral space here. You can't play both sides of the fence. It's one or the other. You know, it's interesting. And by the way, this sets up chapter 11. Do you see that? With those who have faith and preserve their souls. And by the way, this is what it looks like. And he takes a little aside here and takes us down this road describing what faith looks like. And then he picks up with that idea back where he was here, that you're an athlete. And you need to hold up under the struggle so that you can win. And he takes that picture and turns it to a race, chapter 12. And all the faithful that were successful before, they're rooting for you. And because they did it, you can do it. And that's where he's going from here. And so it sets up perfectly right where he's headed. When we look at chapter 6, we talked a lot about disappointment. You know, we talked about Christmas and being disappointed, wanting that perfect toy at Christmas, right? You wake up and it's not there. And you just feel, oh. You know, your mind's not on all the presents that you do have. It's on the one that you didn't have, right? And yet that really pales when we think about and compare those disappointments to the disappointments that we have as adults. I mean, we think back and how silly, you know, that stupid little toy or whatever. And if it's Star Wars, Jason probably has it up at the shed somewhere, right? I saw that Millennium Falcon up there. I don't know if it's still there or not, but
Better raise the price.
yeah, gotta raise the price for it. But you see, when we experience disappointments as adults, and we think about the disappointments in life that these first century Christians were going through, and really the disappointment, I'm trying to find the right words here. When we look at disappointment in general, disappointment comes when our expectations and reality meet and they don't live up to each other. In other words, here's our expectations over here, here's reality over here, and there's a gap between the two. And that gap is disappointment. And yet, through this section, unlike chapter 6 where he talks about disappointment, in this section our author builds up the argument that disbelief is worse than disappointment. And that's why we have that last little statement. What choice are we going to make? Are we going to let the disappointments in life lead to our disbelief and therefore leave? Or are we going to hold on? But the truth is, when we look through the book of Hebrews and we look at how the author is set up, how that God has spoken and he's communicated to us through his Son in these last days, and we have to ask ourselves, are we listening to that word, right? Are we listening to that word, and are we doing so daily? And by doing so daily, we're being encouraged to endure, knowing that faith has its reward in the life to come. And yet we know through experience that faith is no easy task. We have to learn to endure in the context of the household of God. And we have to learn to endure and reach out to one another, helping each other. And that takes us all the way back to those let us commands, right? Let us approach God. Let us have confidence. Let us stir one another up. All of which happens corporately when we're together assembled in the body of Christ. And when we leave the body of Christ, we're shirking our responsibilities not only to God, but to one another. And so we've got to look like these individuals. We've got to look to those who've gone before, who gave us an example of faith to follow. And we're going to see that those individuals in chapter 11 are the ones that make up that great crowd of witnesses that are cheering us on, that are exhorting us, encouraging us not to give up the fight, not to quit the race. Now, we're all Christians in this room, but there may be some here who are, for whatever reason, tempted to quit. Maybe some here who are struggling in their faith. And you need the prayers of your brothers and sisters in Christ. We want to do that for you right now. Won't you come? Together we stand and sing.
It's 866. 866.